Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to Paranormal Karen. It is October 18th. I'm very excited about my guest. Really quick, some comedy dates coming up to you, for you. Hopefully you are in Ann Arbor, Michigan. You can see me tonight because I'm there the 17th through the 19th. Also, I will be in Idaho Falls November 7th and Ogden, Utah the 8th and 9th. Oh, and in Oregon at the Chinook Winds Casino November 22 and 23. If you are looking for a great cryptozoological movie and you are on Amazon or wherever, or you're buying, you will see your movie start and perhaps the cutest, greatest logo I have ever seen. You are watching Small Town Monsters. Today, my guest, Seth Breedlove, that's you. That's your logo. How are you tonight, Seth?
I'm good. Also, as soon as we started talking, a dog started barking outside, and my own dogs are on high alert. So if rambunctiousness starts, you'll know what it is.
Okay,
it's not insane animals.
It's not a monster. You know, I live in right now in LA. I'm still in the fan air conditioner phase. So, and my listeners know I just go with it. So if we have a little upset, we'll just let it go. But thanks for coming on. You are somewhere in Ohio, correct?
Yeah. I'm located in Wadsworth, which is just south of Cleveland.
Oh, that's great. I play Cleveland often, but you are really one of the few cryptozoology guys out there. It is not a lot of people doing that, correct?
I just consider myself like a filmmaker, so I don't really. I received a cryptozoologist of the year award a couple of years ago, which was strange for me. I mean, it was obviously greatly appreciated, but it was strange for me because I really just consider myself an indie filmmaker who happens to be making movies predominantly about like cryptids and the paranormal. But yeah, it's a burgeoning field of personalities for sure.
Yeah. And so the paranormal kind of found you more so than you finding the paranormal.
I guess like when I got into it, in 2013 is when I sort of decided to throw my hat into the ring and start like, I don't know, trying to put my own stamp on the subject. And that was just because I had spent, maybe like 4 or 5 years, just, I guess, observing it from the outside and listening to podcasts and something like that and stuff like that. I need to work on like some sort of ridiculous encounter story, like over the top, like I was attacked by Sasquatch or something. Cause I don't have anything that I can point to and be like, this happened to me. And that's what got me into it. It's just, I gained an interest in it. I can remember like the evolution of getting into all this stuff is very, fresh in my mind, I guess just cause I haven't been into it all that long. But I mean, in 2009, I started like a medical billing job, and the only thing I did, you could do during the day to pass time while you were doing your incredibly monotonous job was to listen to podcasts. And I think it was like more due to boredom than anything that I kind of got into it. And I can remember like very early on, like drawing the line at different ridiculous, what I considered ridiculous at the time, aspects of the various phenomena I was into. And it's interesting now because I think I'm making movies about things that I would have thought were absurd like 10 years ago.
Right.
And there's just nothing, but unfortunately, there's nothing I can point to and be like, I had this incredible experience and that's why I got into it. It was just curiosity and, and then over time I began to look into the subject. Mostly, like, I think what got me to the point where I am today more than anything is Bigfoot and the fact that there were sightings Bigfoot-like creatures in the town where I'd grown up.
Well, you know what? You were probably too young. You were never an Art Bell listener, right? That was way before your time.
I am familiar with Art, and I have listened to a couple episodes, but yeah, it was not something I listened to, when I was a kid or anything.
He was the master showman. So, see, now my favorite, because The Mothman of Point Pleasant is probably one of the first films of yours I saw, which, by the way, I do love the way you make films and you sort of add all different kinds of media, like there's sort of animation mixed in with real footage. And I just really thought that makes your films even more interesting for already topics that I'm already in. I'm already in on the Mothman. And you have another one coming out in 2020, The Mothman Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that,
yeah.
That's all the stuff in Chicago, right?
No, the Chicago stuff is in Terror in the Skies, which was our earlier release this year that came out in June. And that movie sort of delved into the Chicago Mothman. No, this is a direct sequel to the Mothman at Point Pleasant, and it will again sort of use Point Pleasant as the home base, but it's going to explore sort of the history of, I guess, Mothman type creature sightings around Appalachia, not just Point Pleasant, and how the sightings that have gone on are sort of tied into other Appalachian folklore. So it's going to expand on what we did with the Mothman at Point Pleasant and sort of bridge the gap between the 1966 and 67 stuff and sightings of similar creatures around Appalachia today.
It's fascinating to me, that particular one, and the point. I don't know why that, like, I was never a Bigfoot, kind of into Bigfoot that much until I had Tim Renner, I think it was Renner, on my show, and he really opened up that world to me as it being interesting. But I've always found the Mothman story with the UFOs and all the other stuff that seemed to go on at that time, it just, like, there's no rhyme or reason to it. That's what always fascinated me.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we get, I find the same thing with like Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, which is fitting because both those movies, the Mothman at Point Pleasant and Invasion on Chestnut Ridge, came out in the same year. But it's interesting because I think this kind of stuff goes on all around the country.
You know what, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you must have an iPhone, correct?
Yes.
Something happened in this download with the sound that it kind of goes in and out when it shouldn't. But I just had to say that, folks, I hope we fix this in post. But I just wanted to bring that up for a second so that I don't know why. And it's been happening all day with the iPhones. Okay, so you were saying, go ahead, you were saying Chestnut Ridge. It's sort of the same around there.
Oh, yeah. The idea of like window areas that John Keel's sort of popularized, and like places where multiple phenomena are sort of taking place concurrently. I think that stuff is going on all around the country, and I don't know why it seems to spike at like specific times, but it does in 66 and 67 with the Mothman and UFO sightings and all that kind of stuff. That seems to have been like one of those weird flaps where everything just exploded around that particular area, and it wasn't relegated to just Point Pleasant. I mean, our film obviously focused on Point Pleasant, but those sightings were going on of not just the Mothman, but also like UFOs and Men in Black. That stuff was going on all over the Ohio Valley, and especially the state of West Virginia. And West Virginia I don't think that stuff, especially the UFO sightings, they didn't die off in 67. In fact, I think if anything, the UFO sightings spiked. And I know during the 70s, there were massive like waves of UFO sightings to the point where, like I've heard stories from people who live back in the hills in West Virginia who talk about their grandparents or their parents talking about UFOs being seen on the hills on a nightly basis, to the point where it became like old hat to the hill people, to like people who lived up in the hills. So it's Yeah, and I don't know that it's stopped. Honestly, I have a good friend that has had her own sort of UFO encounter down in the back hills of West Virginia. So, but there is something like, I don't know. I think more than likely it's the fact that the stories break into the national media, and then there's more attention placed on them, and it might make it seem as if there's a spike when really it's just, there's all of a sudden there's newfound attention.
I wonder if the UFO sightings were probably so passe to them that actually Mothman was sort of the freak show more than the UFOs.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is it almost seems like it kind of seems like that, and then you get into 67, and all of a sudden all the focus shifts to those UFO reports, especially the ones over the Ohio River and down into like Hocking and all that kind of stuff. And I think that when the Silver Bridge collapsed, and all of a sudden the attention shifted off of the Mothman because of those collapses. I mean, there were UFOs seen sort of skimming the river the night of the bridge collapse.
Wow.
Yeah. And like what the connection is between like the Mothman and the UFOs and the Men in Black is anyone's guess. But, what I'm starting to notice is I don't necessarily think that, that any of those phenomena were necessarily new to the area. And if you trace the history of folklore and legends around West Virginia and the Ohio Valley, there you can almost see, I guess, stand-ins for the Men in Black and even the Mothman decades before 66 and 67. I mean, in our movie, we talked a little bit about the Birdman, which was like this moth, maybe like a Mothman type creature that was seen around Point Pleasant prior to World War II, and it seemed to be like a harbinger of doom, and that sort of thing runs through, all of flying cryptid sightings, actually, and our Terror in the Skies film got into, the history of like thunderbirds and how they were considered to be preceding thunderstorms, and that gave them sort of this air of being a predecessor for bad tidings and things like that. So it's just interesting to me how a lot of the phenomena that went on in 66 and 67 seems to be maybe just another version of what had been going on in that area for centuries. Also, I've got to stop saying phenomena because I'm pretty sure I've said those at least 200 times already.
Well, we'll accept them. And the Terror in the Skies, is that anywhere where people can download it?
It's on Amazon and Vimeo on demand and VidiSpace, and it's available on DVD. Yeah.
Okay, because that was the one that I really was excited to get. I didn't see it on my Amazon, and I no longer have a DVD player, which I guess is getting to be a issue probably with things.
Yeah, I don't either. So I'm with you. Yeah, it's not. It's still. I think on Amazon it's still available for rental and purchase. It's not up on Prime or anything yet, and it probably won't be until sometime after Momo comes out, maybe like a month or two. We have to stagger everything, when it comes to like putting it all out, because we're putting out 3 productions a year. And some of it's just based around trying to keep the revenue stream coming in so we can continue to fund the projects we're working on.
Yeah. And, that is, I actually really admire, it's kind of funny because I read tarot cards during the day, and, a lot of times it is really telling people, you don't have to just go to college, get a job. You can do what you want to do. And that's something I admire about what you're doing, is you're doing what you want to do and making it work and doing it well. It was great when I was watching the Mothman of Point Pleasant, because you had a story, because I've seen almost all the Mothman things, and there was a story in yours that I didn't see elsewhere that I think encapsulates the moment. And it's like, if you were to see the Mothman, the guy talks about how they were on the motorcycles and they go into the building in the TNT area, and this thing kind of waddles over to them. And this was the part, I'm sure you don't remember everything about your films, but this is the part that was animated. And they just kind of have that moment where they look at each other, and then the Mothman thing kind of wanders off and flies away. And I always think, see, now that is one of those moments that in the paranormal we kind of dream of, but would be terrifying. Could you really imagine that moment of any of these creatures that you report on just looking at it eye to eye?
Oh, that's what's interesting about Bob. You're talking about the Bob Bosworth encounter in the North Power Plant. What's interesting about that is Bob wasn't scared. In fact, he said he was, I believe his exact description was like somewhere between fascination and curiosity. Like his biggest regret was that he didn't reach out and touch the thing because it was standing so close to him. But he was not, he did not have like a really strong fear response when he saw it, which I always thought was really interesting. And even like when he described it, it was more of like a, not an animal, but like someone encountering something that didn't get a threat sort of vibe off of.
Right.
But yeah, me personally, no. If I saw the Mothman, I'd probably turn. I hate moths, and I'm terrified of. I'm absolutely terrified of moths. In fact, there's like a video floating around online of me screaming like a lady, like capturing this moth in this Tupperware container in our kitchen, and my wife loves to play that for me every year. So,
and moths, not spiders, anything else, just moths.
Spiders and moths. Here's the thing, though. Like, if you give me a camera, if I have a camera in my hand and I encounter a moth or a spider, I'm good. Like cameras are my weird, like flak jacket or something. Like, if I've got a camera on, I feel like I'm invincible or something. It's just the nature of me. But yeah, I'm terrified of spiders and snakes. You can throw snakes in there. Basically anything like centipedes, millipedes, those are also on the list.
Yeah, they're pretty gross. Although I did just find a brown recluse in my apartment, and everyone was like, "Are you going to move?" And I was like, "Are you crazy? It's rent control. I'm staying, and I'm getting rid of the spiders." So the Mothman, but on that one, you're right. I don't remember even in that. Well, I guess when he was chasing the cars, because I have been on regular paranormal things where I've been around dark entities, and you are full of fear before anything happens. So I wonder if that. Like the Mothman really doesn't seem to have any attacks. I know he's kind of standing on people's porches and looking in, but that was something I did not realize about Bigfoot. I was under the impression until I have this guest on that Bigfoot was just not a vegetarian, just walking around, but there have really been Bigfoot attacks, haven't there?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent. I think right now the hot thing, cryptozoology and Bigfootdom in general, is to tell these really like spooky stories about Bigfoot, like beheading people and like all sorts of chaos. I don't necessarily buy into a lot of that stuff, but certainly there are quote unquote like Bigfoot attack stories, and I guess like the most famous is probably Ape Canyon, which was the story that happened back in the 1920s near Mount St. Helens, where these miners, were in this mine, or were in their cabin, and supposedly the cabin was besieged by these Bigfoot type creatures in the middle of the night who threw rocks on the cabin and tried to smash it in. That's probably one of the most famous. I mean, I don't think you can. Here's the thing: like, if Bigfoot exists, it's a 6 foot tall to 10 foot tall, massive lumbering ape-like creature that lurks in American forest. There's no way if it exists and it's a flesh and blood primate that at some point it hasn't encountered humans and had a negative interaction.
Been aggravated, yes.
Yeah. So there's no way that if they exist that they haven't some sort of physical, confrontation with someone. I don't necessarily buy into Bigfoot as like a boogeyman of the woods. I just have never really I've never really understood that idea if you're looking at it from a realistic standpoint. If Bigfoot's out there beheading everyone he encounters and killing people and, you know, taking children and all this kind of stuff, I think they'd be a lot easier to find, strangely enough.
Yeah. And you know what? Hold on one second. That leads me right to my next question. Hang on. Who do tarot readers go for tarot readings? They go to Melissa Sonova at melissasonova.com. She gave me the best reading a couple of months ago that is still resonating and helping me out now. She is authentic and to the point. You loved her on the podcast. She is the no BS tarot reader. She also has a tarot class online right now. Check it out. Just watching the promo, you will see how much fun you are going to have while you learn. Also, check out her book, which is always right beside me when I'm doing my readings or my tarot card for me in the morning. It is called Kitchen Table Tarot, and you will love it. Melissa Sonova, that's MELISSACYNOVA. Check her out. Okay, so have you ever thought about, I know it's not available now, but I am obsessed with the Skinwalker Ranch, and I can't find I know I have to know someone that has been on the Skinwalker Ranch where, again, multiple events happening. Have you ever thought of doing a film? Well, I guess you can't now, doing a film there.
I mean, we have thought of it. I'm not closed off to it either, because I think Jeremy Corbell's movie sort of dropped the ball when it came to you know, relaying the history and the story of the Skinwalker Ranch. But we actually were going to make a Skinwalker movie in 2017, right around the time where it was announced that Jeremy was making his. So we were going to do one, and I had even contacted and spoken with George Knapp about being in it. But unfortunately, Jeremy was moving with his at that point, so we were unable to. But I mean, yeah, that's a story I would love to have the opportunity to tell at some point, just because it is, you know, like you said, it covers all those different subjects so well, and it seems to involve so many different, you know, bizarre God, I'm so sick of saying the word phenomenon, but it involves so many different types of phenomena.
We need a paranormal thesaurus, right?
Yeah.
Incident. We'll use incident or that. You know, so the current one now is Momo, which again is it's very interesting. I know that Mothman flies and then Bigfoot walks, but even all these, the Flatwood Monster, I know that has a different shape, but it seems a little bit like it's all the same gene pool, or what there's a similarity between all of these. And Momo is your newest film that you're out promoting right now. How did you find out about that, or how was researching that?
Yeah, well, Momo was like, when I first got into all this, I was super fascinated by Momo because the I guess, quote unquote, design of the creature was so unique. And I came to find out, you know, it actually bore some similarities to Minerva Monster, which was the Bigfoot that we covered in our first movie. But Momo was one that I'd been into since I first got into all this. And in fact, like as far back as 2014, when we were talking about making our first movie, I was already talking about making a movie about Momo. So I had spent the better part of the last 4 years looking into the case and trying to turn up witnesses and people we could speak to, you know, regarding the case, especially the Harrison family. And for listeners who don't know about Momo, basically, in 1972, this family named the Harrisons, who lived in a town called Louisiana, Missouri, which sits right on the banks of the Mississippi River. Their house is butted up against this large hill called Marzoff Hill, or Star Hill, as it's known to locals. Their house sits right against that hill. And one day, two of their kids, Terry and Wally, were playing outside when they heard something in the woods. They looked up, and out of the woods walked this massive sort of hairy creature with hair that was abnormally long. Even for like a Bigfoot report, it was abnormally long. It hung down, hung down to the ground almost. And it seemed to be carrying some sort of dead animal, which they believed was either a dog or another dead Momo, like a dead baby Momo. It came out of the woods, terrified them. They screamed. Their sister looked out the window of the house, and she saw it too. The kids ran inside, and they called their dad. Their dad came home and encountered strange smells and sounds in the woods. And from there, the story sort of blew up around Louisiana, Missouri, with other people claiming to have encounters. And it sort of culminated. Actually, it didn't culminate. Over the course of that summer, there were multiple events where like posses were formed and went up on the hill looking for Momo. And over time, the sighting sort of dwindled off, and Momo has pretty much been forgotten about until today. And we set out to make a movie that is as much an exploration of drive-in movie culture and a look at how stories can evolve when they're retold through film, as it was a look at the original Momo case. So the movie is 50% narrative and 50% documentary, with the narrative section sort of being this untold or unreleased 1970s movie that was about Momo and some of the other events that were taking place around Louisiana, Missouri at the time. And it has a lot of great actors and friends of mine and non-actors in it. And then the documentary sort of comes in and sets the record straight about what actually happened in 1972. And it's something I'm super proud of. I just haven't, this is the 9th movie, plus 2 miniseries that we've made. So finding new ways to tell stories gets difficult. And this is a new way to tell a story. And we really had a good time, getting to play around with the format like this.
And right now, is it? I know I was seeing on Facebook. You had it in a theater in Kentucky. It all sold out. It's selling out all over. Being that this does come out on October 18th, is there any place people can see it or look forward to coming out to view it? I know you're going to do the Michigan Paragon too, or is that before we're taping this?
It actually came out on September 20th. Michigan Paragon was last month, I think, at some point. And it played it like a midnight screening at Crypticon, and then it played in Canton, which is sort of where I'm from, at the Canton Palace Theater, and then this weekend it plays at the State Theater. So those events will all be done by the time this hits, but it will be on Amazon, Vimeo on Demand, Video Space, and potentially some other platforms. We're in distribution talks, but I have not decided yet if we're going to go forward with that.
I have not seen Momo, and also the Flatwoods Monster. That's another one that it's very interesting. There's a couple of things I, for some reason, just can't. The Jersey Devil throws me. I don't feel like I can't go there, and I can go anywhere. I'm very much. I just had on a guy talking about fairies, and but the Jersey Devil is the only one that kind of throws me where I can't go with the legend and everything like that. But the Flatwoods Monster, that is a very almost a little different, but again very dark. Tell us about the Flatwoods Monster.
Yeah, the Flatwoods Monster was so in 1952 there was a number of kids that were playing football in this little town of Flatwoods, West Virginia, and they saw a strange sort of flaming object streak across the sky and seemingly come to a crash on top of a nearby hill. They went up the hill. The kids stopped at their house on their way up. They got their two of the boys' mother and another boy named Lemon, and they all went up the hill to look for this object. When they reached the top of the hill, they encountered this sort of glowing mist, and supposedly they all saw a UFO in this field. I say supposedly because over the course of making the film that we made about it, we came to find that a lot of aspects of the case that have been repeated as fact did not seem to gel with what the original witnesses remembered. They did not. They never walked up to a UFO, despite the fact that Ivan Sanderson and Gray Barker have sort of echoed that idea for decades that these kids had walked up the hill and found a UFO. None of these kids sort of recalled that aspect of the story, but the mother, Ann Jean Lemon, did recall looking down into a valley and seeing what looked like something glowing and on fire in the trees just below the hill they were on. So it's possible that those details just got sort of, I guess blown up over time. But anyway, once they reached the top of the hill, they encountered this strange mist and a massive 13-foot tall, sort of cylindrical, robotic, monstrous creature or robot on the top of this hill. They took off at a run. Seemingly, the thing almost gave chase, and they took off down the hill. Made it back to the May home, and when they got there, they called the police, and the police came out and investigated the hill. They didn't find anything on the hill other than some what appeared to be tire tread marks, which were later identified as the tire tracks for someone that had driven up the hill earlier in the day. So it's a really weird case. The military ended up coming in later that same night, and it's possible or pretty well known, actually, that they did remove chunks of the tree underneath which the robotic monster was sort of seen standing, and some other evidence that they found at the scene at the time. And what they did with that stuff, I don't know. I think it was actually sent off to Wright-Patterson, as you would expect, and probably lost or something like that.
Or buried or hidden. Yeah.
Just the typical.
Yeah. So you kind of go at this like a reporter. You're making a documentary and you're reporting on this. What, do you have any opinion on what these things are?
Well, it just depends on the case. I mean, like it would be the easiest thing in the world for me to try to lump it all under one thing. But, like when it comes to Bigfoot, I mean, my personal opinion on Bigfoot is that if it exists, it's some sort of undiscovered ape. And I base that on the fact that that's where the preponderance of evidence that it exists for Bigfoot. That sort of seems to be where it's pointing.
It's just something we haven't discovered yet. We haven't caught one yet.
Yeah, and it's hiding out somewhere. And that's if they exist. And again, like I'm not 100% on Bigfoot, although I am about 80%. So, but when it comes to like the Flatwoods Monster, I think the Flatwoods Monster was probably like some sort of experimental government craft or something like that. The May boys, who were two of the boys that were there that night, they don't recall what the newspapers claimed they said at the time. The newspaper sort of said that they saw this 13-foot tall lumbering monster that was breathing fire and walked like Frankenstein, and bunny hopped as well. That was a repeated thing I kept reading. It was that it sort of bunny hopped down the hill, and they don't recall any of that. What they recall is seeing an object that was sort of shaped like a rocket that was on top of this hill underneath a tree. When they first saw it, what they took to be eyes at the time, but now sort of believed to be portholes in the side of the rocket, had two beams of light that were pointed into the sky when they first saw it. The beams of light turned toward them when they walked up the hill. What they're describing sounds like some sort of experimental rocket. And there were other similar objects seen that night around Flatwoods and around West Virginia, including like one that supposedly landed right over the Elk River about 8 miles away from that same spot. So there was something else that crashed that night they never were able to find. So in my opinion, that particular case is probably like some sort of experimental government craft or something, I don't know, a weapon or something like that.
That's interesting.
And
Mothman?
yeah, and Mothman, when it comes to Mothman, I'm of a few different opinions. I think some of the reports were of an abnormally large owl. In fact, I think that's pretty well known at this point that
that's a barn owl.
There was a very large owl that was flying around Point Pleasant. It was eventually shot and killed and stuffed, and is now in the Mothman Museum. It sits, I think, if you go in, it sits just above their soda machine in the main store.
How big is that moth or that owl?
It's not that big. It's got a wingspan of about 4.5, 5 feet. So it's not that big. It's only about 2 feet tall, maybe a foot and a half tall. It's not very tall, but I'm pretty sure that's what a number of people saw, including some of the reports that have been repeated as Mothman reports that were actually reported initially as a large owl. So I think some of those newspaper reporters were, maybe a little disingenuous in their reporting of the events and turned a story that was really just about a large owl that you guys saw in the TNT area into a story about the Mothman. But you can't just write it all off as a large owl. Some of those reports are really bizarre, I want to say Sharon Shaw, but it's not Sharon Shaw. I can't remember the name now.
This is the lady that had the baby, that was carrying the baby?
Well, no, that is, now I can't remember her name either. I need to brush up on my Mothman more clearly. But no, there was a lady that was driving by a golf course in broad daylight and said she saw the Mothman standing on the green, and she ended up coming down with this rare condition after she saw the thing that is actually typically associated with UFO sightings. She had this really bizarre eye defect where her eyes were bleeding after the sighting, and we talked about it in the Mothman Point Pleasant film. But there's some of those reports like that you just can't make heads or tails of. And then there's reports like Lawrence Gray's. And Lawrence is the one who woke up in the middle of the night in his house and said that Mothman was standing at the end of his bed. And, not to write off his report, but it's also possible that, maybe just the hysteria in the area at the time had affected his dreams or something, and he had a waking nightmare or something like that.
That's kind of what I think the Jersey Devil is. I think there's a tale about it, and then somebody kind of sees something scurry away, and then the story gets a little bigger, and pretty soon everybody's talking about it.
I think that happens a lot. Yeah. I think that is a really common thing, especially when you get a sort of cultural figure like the Mothman, who becomes almost like he's the center of attention. From 1966 until 67, reports were weekly. I mean, the column that Mary Hyre was writing, was running in the paper, and she was covering all these UFO reports and Mothman reports, and people are going to start, whether they want to or not, they're going to start seeing Mothman where there might not actually be a Mothman.
Yeah, it kind of became in their consciousness. Well, she had also those phone calls. It's funny when you talk about that rare disease. There was another movie about the Mothman called The Eyes of the Mothman. And the people that made that film all ended up sick after making it. And they weren't even, they were doing it like you did from the past. But I remember, cause I think that there was something in the extras or something that they all got very sick. But that TNT area where they had all that, I mean, maybe that was it, but it seems like there's a lot of, whatever that is, radiation or something with the eyes bleeding. You're right. It's like, there's no way to kind of write that off. The story where the lady was carrying the baby and then she falls because she sees the Mothman, and the Mothman is just kind of looking in the window. That story has stayed as is, right? Nobody kind of pulled that away and made it. Well, it wasn't quite like that.
Actually, unfortunately, when we were making the Mothman at Point Pleasant, I actually contacted it would have been one of the children that was in the house when that event happened. And their memory of what took place that night was that The other two people that were present did not recall seeing anything in the sky as far as like a Mothman type creature. What they did recall, the only thing they recall from that night is that there were a set of eyes that came up to the window, which they believed to belong to an owl. And that the lady and her baby were very shook up by sort of an encounter with an owl. Now, again, that could simply be their interpretation of events versus the other parties. And again, it's driving me crazy. I cannot think of her name right now because we have that interview with her in our first movie. But yeah, it's a weird story. It's the Mothman's interesting because you have so many competing theories about what was going on in the area at the time, and you can't write off the fact that there are owls around Point Pleasant.
Right.
But I just don't think an owl can explain away something like Tom Urey's sighting, where Tom was driving down a road in broad daylight and encountered something, that paralleled his car for like a mile doing speeds of like 90 miles an hour. I mean, that's not an owl during broad daylight anyway, but let alone to go that fast. Or even Bob Bosworth's, run-in that you and I were talking about in the North Power Plant. That doesn't, unless that sort of stretches the boundaries of an abnormally large owl if you walked right up to it and it was like eye level with him.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, a 6 foot tall owl is more terrifying to me than Mothman.
Yes, it is. They'd be carrying away dogs and stuff. Yeah. And I always think too, a lot of people in that area should know what an owl looks like. Granted, those of us in Los Angeles may not identify it right away, but I would think in that area they would. And also you're right. I remember the first time I took someone paranormal investigating, and something very specific happened, and he was a non-believer, and it really shook him that night, what happened. And the next day he called me, and he had almost done a 180, and I felt like the fear had kind of got to him. So he turned it into, well, you know what I was thinking, this kind of happened, and it didn't really happen like that. And he sort of, after this thing he had clearly seen, he kind of twisted it so that he wasn't quite as fearful. So I think that happens sometimes too. But
well, yeah, and I don't even know that it's simply that twisting it so you're not as fearful. I mean, maybe it wasn't that case, but I think there's a because this actually happened to me, like when I was in the Ouachita Mountains last year, and in the middle of the night something was throwing rocks and screaming at our tent. And after the fact, like, we were playing, my friend and I that were in the tent, we were sort of playing everything back, and we found ourselves at times sort of trying to explain everything away, just because I think you're naturally inclined to disbelieve that something so out of the ordinary can happen to you. So your natural inclination is almost to try to rationalize what the unusual experience might have actually been. But if I think if you actually reach back into your memory, you can recall, how bizarre it was. Like, we were trying to think if it wasn't like a fox or something screaming at us in the night, and just a series of events that happened to sort of make you question, what was going on in the first place. I think that's sort of a common response, and I see that a lot actually in people who've witnessed unusual events.
So before we go to the break, what did you come to a conclusion what it was?
I think it was Bigfoot, if they exist. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing that's throwing rocks where we were. I mean, it's the whole thing to explain why I believe if you watch our On the Trail of Bigfoot miniseries, it's in episode 5. But where we were was not a place where, like, a hillbilly would be on a hill, throwing a rock unless they had a death wish. So
I love how that story ended. We thought it was Bigfoot. I love that. That's great. Hey, hang on one second. I want to come ask you about a couple of other monsters. Psychic medium and buddy of mine, Terry Huberman, is with me today. Terry, you've given me so many great readings and healings, and now you've got everything together in one package. Tell me about that.
I sure do. So this package has energy healings, readings, and coaching.
Coaching, that's the best. And people, they buy the package. You give them coaching once a week?
Yeah, so we meet online once a week, and in between, there's support as well.
And who would this be for?
This is really for folks who are in indecision, needing to get into their intuition because they're blocked or stuck. They need to move forward. And so we explore what the root causes of the problems are.
And helps them get out of their own way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Terrific. And what can they expect from this?
Sure. So moving from anxiousness to confidence, accessing their freedom, joy, and security, and really being in alignment with themselves so they have that clear direction, so they know, aha, this is what I need to do next to reach my goals.
So now there's something that's free so people can talk to you and see if this is for them.
Yeah, absolutely. On my website, terryhuberman.com, there is a page where you can click, and it's the intuitive coaching package. And there is a button there that says schedule a free call. So you go ahead, schedule it. We'll get on a call and you can learn more about this program, and we'll see if this is a good fit for you or not.
See if there's chemistry.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's an odd date.
terryhuberman.com, TerrieHuberman. I highly recommend it, folks. So you really do go out there in the woods, stay there and look for it. They have the guy that has all those tapes of what he believes are Bigfoot sounds. Did you hear something like that, or was it, have you heard those tapes on YouTube?
I don't know which ones you're referring to. There's quite a few, but what we heard was not really identifiable. It was, it started as a very loud whoop, and then it became a sort of a laughter. The closest thing I can compare it to is a gibbon. That's sort of what we found on YouTube that sounded like what we heard. But it was exceptionally loud, and it ran for about 15 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was really bizarre, echoed, and the rock, there was a metal building where we were, and whatever this thing was, I mean, it had hurled a rock that slammed into the top of the metal outbuilding, and then the laughter or whatever you want to call it started. That was, it was very, very unusual.
Did you tape it? Did you have an audio, or was it just kind of happening so fast?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, it was our last night where we were, and I had been fighting a migraine for like 2.5 days, and I genuinely just wanted to go to sleep. And it was about 2:30 in the morning, and I don't know why, but I had been unable to fall asleep. And when the rock crashed into the roof of the outbuilding, I had just fallen asleep. Like I was just going out when it hit. So more than anything, I sat up very irritated that this was happening. And the last thing, for one thing, it only, the entire event only took place over the course of maybe like 20 seconds. But the last thing on my mind at that point was like, grab your phone, start the audio recorder or your camera or whatever.
I had Ryan Singer on a couple of episodes ago, and he had a fascinating story, and he is believed to have encountered something called a rake. Have you heard of that?
I've heard about it. Yes. I don't know. I haven't spent much time looking into the subject, but I am aware of those.
His story was really fantastic. If anybody hasn't heard that, go back and listen to that episode. Okay. The Boggy Creek Monster, that one I haven't seen.
Yeah. The Boggy Creek, is a look at the, sightings of the Fouke monster around the town of Fouke, Arkansas. That occurred. Actually, I mean, the sightings sort of started all the way back in the 1800s, and they still occur today. But during the 70s, there was a sort of a famous movie called The Legend of Boggy Creek that was made about Bigfoot in Fouke, Arkansas. And our movie sort of looks at the stories that inspired that movie and the stories that came after. And that's pretty much just like a the Boggy Creek monster is pretty much just your standard swamp dwelling Bigfoot creature. It seems a little meaner and smellier than Bigfoot in, say, like the Pacific Northwest, which seems to be sort of a flower, the flower child, Bigfoot.
Okay, and two more questions. We're almost at time. I have to ask, if all of these, which one, if you really got a chance, you could only see or have an encounter with one, which one would it be?
Yeah, Bigfoot. I mean, like, just because I think at this point I'm so fascinated by the subject itself, and I think I've come close to something, but I'm like still frustratingly without answers as to what I actually came across. So yeah, if I could see any of them, it would be Bigfoot.
Okay, and tell us what else you have coming up. So we have Momo, and I see you have two others in production here. There's Momo, Mothman Legacy, and moving into UFOs.
Yeah, on the Trail of UFOs, we actually started filming back in July, and that's our follow-up to On the Trail of Bigfoot. And that'll be like a 9 or 10 episode miniseries about the UFO subject, and where it stands in the present day and how that relates to the past and the history of the subject as well. And that will be filming sort of all over the United States. The first shoot was in Nevada and Arizona. The next shoot will be in Florida, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New York, the New England states, and then wrap up in Los Angeles, fittingly.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, we have On the Trail of UFOs, and then in the back half of the year, in September, we'll be releasing the Mothman Legacy, and then in December, we'll be releasing the Bell Witch, the Mark of the Bell Witch, which is sort of our first foray into the supernatural, the ghostly side of things.
Oh, that's great! I can't wait. That one is. I can't wait to see that one. I was gonna hang on a second. I had one more thought in there, and now it has escaped my head. The UFO one, okay, and the podcast. That's the podcast is called Monster. I can't say this. Monsteropolis.
No, you got it. You nailed it.
That's great. So you just became that crypto guy. That's really great. Seth, I really love your films. Everybody go out, buy these films, support this, shall we say, production company. And Seth, anything else you want to tell the people where they can find you, where they can find your films, anything like that?
Yeah, just smalltownmonsters.com will kind of point you in the direction of where you need to go. And then a lot of the movies are on Amazon and Amazon Prime, Vimeo On Demand, iTunes, Google Play, all that kind of stuff as well.
So if we get them on Prime, do you get something from them?
Yes, we do. Not much, but we do.
But it's something. Okay, great. All right. Well, hey, Seth, thanks for taking the time. Really interesting stuff. I love cryptozoology. I went all the way to the crypto museum in Maine, but Lauren wasn't there, and I haven't been able to get a hold of him. So thanks for filling us all in. Such a great topic. And yeah, I look forward. In fact, tonight I'll be watching Terror in the Skies.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me on.
You got it. Hey, everybody, leave me a review wherever you can, 5 stars on iTunes or whatever. Thanks to Mike Flynn at Uno Rising Media, who fixes my sound and whatever's going on with the iPhones. I will see you on the road. I think that's it. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.